long before the mountains rose and the rivers carved their paths through the earth, the world was a swirling chaos of shadow and light. Picture a realm where the heavens and earth had not yet parted, where the very air hummed with the breath of endless possibility. This is where our story begins, not just any tale, but the very origin of Japan itself, woven by the hands of two divine beings, Izanagi and Izanami. Their names echo through time as the creators, the shapers of land and life, the ones who brought order to the formless void. And their story, it's one of love, betrayal, and the kind of cosmic drama that leaves you breathless. Think about it. What could be more captivating than the moment creation itself unfolds? Imagine standing on the floating bridge of heaven, as Izanagi and Izanami did, stirring the endless sea with a jeweled spear. From those first drops of salt water, the islands of Japan were born. But this isn't just a story of how land came to be. It's a tale of partnership, of divine power intertwined with human-like flaws, where every decision ripples across eternity. What happens when the sacred balance between life and death is shattered? What unfolds when love is tested by the unthinkable? That's the heart of this myth, and it's why their story has endured for centuries. You're about to step into a world where gods walk among the elements, where creation is as much about beauty as it is about sacrifice. This isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror held up to human nature itself. The choices Izanagi and Izanami make, their triumphs and their failures, resonate with themes we all understand: love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of what lies beyond the veil. So settle in, because by the end of this journey, you won't just know their names, you'll feel the weight of their legacy. The primordial world awaits, and trust me, you've never heard a creation story quite like this. In the beginning, there was no earth, no sky, only an endless, churning expanse. Imagine a world without shape or sound, where darkness and light swirled together like ink in water. This was the primordial chaos, a place without order, where the very fabric of existence trembled with unformed potential. From this void, the first gods awakened not as we envision them today, but as forces of nature, raw and untamed. Among them rose two deities destined to reshape the universe: Izanagi, whose name means he who invites, and Izanami, she who invites. They weren't just gods, they were the universe's answer to the silence, the hands that would sculpt the world from nothingness. The heavens charged them with a sacred duty, to bring forth land from the roiling sea below. Picture them standing upon the floating bridge of heaven, a realm between the formless and the formed, peering into the abyss. Izanagi plunged his jeweled spear, aim no nuboko, into the waters below. As he stirred, the brine thickened and coiled, droplets falling back into the ocean with a heavy splash. Where they landed, the first island, Onagoro, rose like a miracle from the deep. But creation wasn't a single act, it was a dance, a partnership between two divine forces. Izanagi and Izanami didn't just summon land, they stepped onto it, their footprints shaping valleys and mountains as they walked. Yet even gods are bound by rules. To complete their task, they performed a ritual as old as time itself, circling the celestial pillar, male and female meeting as equals. But here, in this moment of divine union, something went wrong. Izanami spoke first, breaking the natural order, and their firstborn emerged malformed, a thing of shadows cast back into the sea. The lesson was clear: creation demanded harmony, balance, respect. So they tried again, this time with Izanagi leading the chant. From their union sprang the islands of Japan, the rivers, the forests, each a testament to the power of intention, of getting it right. But their story was far from over, because creation is never just about beginnings. It's about what comes after, the love, the mistakes, and the price of defying death itself. The gods looked upon the swirling chaos below and knew the time had come. Creation demanded more than intention. It required a tool, a sacred instrument to bridge the divine and the formless. So they placed into Izanagi's hands the Aim no Nuboko, the heavenly jeweled spear, its length gleaming with celestial light, its tip heavy with the weight of destiny. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a key to the universe, a conduit for shaping reality itself. Picture the moment, Izanagi and Izanami standing on the floating bridge of heaven, the spear's jewels casting fractured light across the endless sea. As Izanagi lowered the Aim no Nuboko into the waters, the ocean trembled not in protest, but in anticipation. With each slow, deliberate stir, the brine thickened like molten silver, clinging to the spear as if the sea itself longed to be transformed. When he lifted it again, droplets fell like diamonds, and where they struck the waves, the first land surged forth, a clump of earth, raw and glistening, rising from the depths. They named it Onagoro, self-curdling island, a birthplace forged not by force, but by alchemy. This wasn't just geography springing to life, it was poetry in motion. Every droplet held a promise, every ripple a future. The islands that followed, 8 in total, were more than landmasses, they were living verses in a divine hymn. The brine that birthed them carried the essence of both chaos and order, a reminder that creation is never clean or simple. It's messy, unpredictable, like ink spreading across paper, forming shapes no one could foresee. Yet in that chaos lay perfection. Japan, emerging not as a conqueror's prize, but as a collaborative masterpiece between gods and elements. And here's what makes this act so profound: the spear wasn't a wand, and the gods weren't magicians. The Aim no Nuboko required effort, partnership, a willingness to engage with the unknown. Izanagi didn't command the sea, he invited it to change, stirring possibility into being. That's the heart of this myth. Creation isn't a solitary act, but a conversation. The spear, the sea, the droplets each played a role, just as Izanagi and Izanami would soon learn that even gods must heed the rules of balance, or pay a price far heavier than brine. Now came the moment that would change everything: the sacred ritual to unite Izanagi and Izanami as creators of the world. Picture them standing before Aim no Mihashira, the celestial pillar that reached endlessly into the heavens, its surface pulsing with divine energy. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was the universe's first contract, a test of harmony between masculine and feminine, order and chaos. The rules were etched into the fabric of existence. Izanagi, as the male deity, was to circle the pillar from the left, while Izanami would approach from the right. When they met on the other side, she was to remain silent, allowing him to speak first, a delicate balance meant to mirror the natural order of creation. But in their eagerness, the unthinkable happened. As their paths converged, Izanami's voice rang out before Izanagi could utter a word. "What a fair and pleasing man you are," she declared, her words cracking the sacred silence like a missed note in a symphony. Izanagi responded in turn, but the damage was done. Their first child, Haruko, was born frail and limbless, a being so unnatural they set him adrift in the reeds, a painful testament to their misstep. This wasn't just a broken rule, it was a fracture in the cosmos itself. The gods had designed creation as a careful dance, and Izanami's impulsive words sent the rhythm spiraling into discord. Here's what makes this moment so haunting. It wasn't pride or defiance that drove Izanami's mistake, but instinct, an unchecked surge of admiration. Yet in the divine realm, even love had its protocols. The tragedy of Haruko wasn't merely a punishment, it was a warning. Like a single misaligned gear in a clock, this small deviation would reverberate through their story, foreshadowing greater ruptures to come. Because in myths, as in life, the first crack in the foundation is never the last, and when Izanagi and Izanami tried again, reversing their roles to follow the proper order, their union birthed the islands of Japan, proof that balance could be restored, but never without cost. The lesson was clear. Creation demanded more than power or passion. It required precision, a recognition that every word, every step, carried weight. And as the couple would soon discover, some broken harmonies can't be repaired, not even by gods. Their union, now aligned with the celestial order, brought forth not just life, but the very bones of Japan itself, 8 sacred islands, each born from the divine interplay of Izanagi and Izanami's love and labor. First came Awaji, cradled in the waters like a jewel, its rugged shores shaped by the gods' footsteps as they pressed the earth into being. Then Shikoku, where mist-cloaked mountains rose as if breathing their first air, rivers carving paths through valleys still warm with creation's touch. Next, Oki emerged, a cluster of isles where the sea whispered secrets to the cliffs, and the gods planted forests as ancient as time. Kyushu followed, its fiery heart pulsing with geothermal veins, a land of hot springs and smoldering peaks, where the earth's energy mirrored the passion of its creators. Iki and Tsushima rose like sentinels in the strait, their rocky spines guarding the newborn world. Then Sado, cradled by tides, its gold-rich soil a testament to the divine alchemy of land and water. Last stood Yamato, the great heart of Japan, where plains stretched wide beneath skies painted by the gods' own hands. These weren't just landmasses, they were living altars, each feature a verse in the hymn of creation. The mountains, they were the spines of fallen titans, their peaks bowed in reverence. The rivers, divine tears, flowing to nourish the soil. Even the trees held echoes of Izanami's voice, their roots tangled with her laughter. To walk these lands was to tread upon sacred ground, where every stone and stream bore the fingerprints of the gods, and as the islands took shape, something deeper stirred, an unbreakable bond between the people and the land, a covenant written not in words, but in the very grain of the earth. This was more than geography, it was a living legacy, a map of divinity etched into soil and sea. With the islands of Japan now cradled by the sea, Izanagi and Izanami turned their divine attention to something even greater, filling this newborn world with spirits. Their union birthed not just land, but life in its most elemental forms. First came the gods of the sea, their voices woven into the crash of waves, their breath in the salt-kissed winds. These were the kami who governed tides and storms, who whispered to fishermen and cradled lost ships. Next rose the gods of the wind, invisible yet undeniable, their presence in the rustle of bamboo and the howl that bent ancient pines. Each gust carried their will, shaping weather and seasons long before mortals learned to name them. Then the mountains awoke. From the peaks of Fuji to the humblest hills, deities emerged, their essence fused with rock and soil. These were not distant rulers, but living forces, a volcano's fury, a valley's stillness, all pulsating with divine energy. Rivers, too, gained voices, their kami dancing in rapids and pooling in quiet eddies. Even the trees were touched by this sacred proliferation, the cedar's resilience, the cherry blossom's fleeting beauty, each a reflection of the gods' boundless creativity. This explosion of deities wasn't random, it was the heart of Shinto belief blooming into being. Unlike religions with singular, omnipotent figures, Shinto thrived in multiplicity, seeing the divine in every ripple and stone. The world wasn't created and abandoned, it was alive, saturated with kami, each a thread in the tapestry of existence. When early farmers bowed to a waterfall or samurai prayed before battle, they weren't honoring abstract concepts. They were conversing with the very children of Izanagi and Izanami. Yet amid this divine fertility, a shadow grew. For every benevolent kami born, those who nurtured harvests or guided travelers, others embodied nature's untamable wildness. The god of earthquakes, the spirit of wildfires, deities whose power demanded respect, not just reverence. This duality reveals a profound truth. Creation isn't just about order, but balance. The same forces that gifted humanity with fertile plains could reclaim them in an instant, and soon this balance would shatter, as Izanami's fate taught the gods and mortals, a lesson written in flame and darkness. The birth of Kagetsuchi should have been a celebration, another divine addition to the pantheon Izanagi and Izanami had built together. But as the fire god emerged, his very existence defied the natural order. Flames erupted from his tiny form, not the warm glow of a hearth, but an all-consuming inferno that scorched the earth and seared the air. Izanami cried out as the fire licked at her flesh, her divine body unable to withstand the agony. The goddess who had breathed life into mountains and rivers now writhed in torment, her screams echoing across the islands she'd helped create. Kagetsuchi, in his raw, untamed power, didn't just burn his mother, he devoured her, reducing the once radiant Izanami to ashes in moments. Izanagi's grief was a tempest. He cradled the charred remnants of his beloved, his tears hissing against the smoldering ground, but sorrow swiftly curdled into fury. How could creation betray its creators? In a rage that shook the heavens, he drew his sword, the blade flashing like a bolt of lightning. Kagetsuchi, still blazing with newborn intensity, barely had time to recoil before Izanagi struck. The first blow cleaved the fire god into 8 pieces, each fragment writhing like a dying ember. But Izanagi wasn't finished. The second strike scattered those pieces further, and the third ignited the very air with his wrath. By the end, Kagetsuchi's remains littered the land, but even in death, the fire god's essence refused to be extinguished. From his corpse sprang new deities, volcanoes that rumbled with his anger, forged flames that carried his heat, and even the gentle fireflies that flickered like his last breaths. This wasn't just a murder, it was a transformation. The same fire that killed Izanami would now burn eternally in the heart of the world, a reminder that creation and destruction were never truly separate. And for Izanagi, his vengeance left him emptier than before. The ashes in his hands were cold, the silence unbearably loud. Rage had given him purpose, but now it was gone, and with it, any hope of pretending this loss could be undone. The truth settled over him like a shroud. Some fires, once kindled, could never be put out. Izanagi stood at the mouth of Yomi, the underworld's gaping entrance, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The air here carried no scent, no salt from the sea, no pine from the forests they'd created together, just the thick, suffocating odor of damp earth and something fouler, something irreversible. He knew the rules. No mortal or god could enter Yomi and return unchanged, but grief had clawed away his reason, leaving only raw, reckless determination. With a shuddering breath, he stepped forward, the darkness swallowing him whole. The further he descended, the more the world unraveled. Walls of twisted roots pulsed like veins, their surfaces slick with moisture that wasn't water. Shadows moved independently of light, twitching at the edges of his vision as if alive, and the sounds whispers without voices, the creak of unseen things shifting in the gloom. This wasn't just absence of light, it was a realm where time itself had curdled, where every step felt heavier, as if the air had thickened into syrup. Then he saw her, Izanami's silhouette, barely visible in the murk, her back turned to him. Relief flooded Izanagi, until she spoke. Her voice, once the melody of creation, now echoed like wind through hollow bones. "You should not have come." When she turned, the flicker of his torch revealed what Yomi had done. Her skin clung to her frame like rotting parchment, her eyes glinting with a light that wasn't reflection but something hungry, something that had tasted death and found it endless. The goddess who birthed nations was gone. In her place stood a wraith bound to decay's machinery, her very presence making the air thrum with the weight of broken promises. Izanagi begged, bargaining with the echoes of their love, but Yomi had already written its terms. Izanami couldn't leave, not because the underworld held her captive, but because she'd consumed its pomegranate, its stale fruit staining her lips. She was no longer his wife, she was Yomi's queen, and when she reached for him, her fingers left trails of blackened flesh in the air, the finality of her touch screaming what words couldn't. Some borders, once crossed, seal shut forever. A flicker of hope sparked in Izanagi's chest as Izanami paused in the gloom. The silence stretched like a taut thread before she finally spoke, her voice cracked yet familiar. "I will return with you," she whispered, "but you must not look upon me until we reach the world above." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. He agreed instantly, his hands trembling with the promise of her restoration. The path back to the living world stretched before them, an ascent through winding tunnels where the air grew thicker with each step, the scent of damp earth giving way to something faintly sweet, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. Izanagi's resolve wavered with every footfall. Behind him, the scrape of Izanami's steps sounded wrong, uneven, labored, as if her body fought against each movement. The torchlight cast grotesque shadows that slithered along the walls, shapes that seemed to twist in warning, but it was the silence that gnawed at him. No shared laughter, no whispered reassurances, just the hollow echo of their progress and the occasional rustle of something unseen in the dark. His fingers tightened around the torch. Was she still the woman he loved, or had Yomi's rot taken more than flesh? The question coiled around his thoughts, tightening with every step. Then came the sound that shattered his restraint, a wet, ragged gasp, followed by the sickening drip of liquid hitting stone. Izanagi spun, torch raised, and the light revealed the unimaginable. Izanami's once radiant form was a nightmare of decay, her skin mottled with patches of putrid green, her hair matted with fluids no living body could produce. Where her eyes should have been, only hollow sockets gleamed, yet they saw him, piercing through the illusion of their reunion. Maggots writhed in the gaps between her teeth as she hissed, "You looked." The accusation wasn't anger, it was despair. In that moment, he understood the taboo wasn't about vanity. It was the difference between memory and reality, between love and the horror of what love cannot survive. Yomi's vengeance was swift. The walls convulsed as shrieking spirits descended, their forms a whirlwind of claws and teeth. Izanami's rotting hand lashed out, not to strike him, but to seize his wrist, her grip burning with a cold that seared deeper than fire. "You've killed us both," she moaned, as the underworld's chorus wailed in agreement. The torch guttered, its light failing, and Izanagi knew with terrible certainty, some truths, once seen, cannot be unseen. The goddess he came to save was gone, and in her place stood Yomi's queen. Her love curdled into something as merciless as the grave. The moment Izanagi saw the truth, Izanami's decay, the writhing shadows of Yomi clinging to her like a second skin, instinct screamed at him to run. His sandals slapped against the stone as he bolted toward the surface. The torch discarded, its dying light swallowed by the hungry dark behind him. But Yomi wasn't a place that surrendered its visitors easily. The tunnel seemed to stretch, the walls pulsing as if alive, roots snaking out to clutch at his ankles. Behind him, Izanami's voice morphed into something monstrous, a chorus of shrieks and hisses as she summoned the 8 thunder gods, their forms crackling with underworld energy. The air itself turned viscous, each breath like swallowing ash, but Izanagi's terror lent him strength. He tore through the gloom, his hands bleeding as he clawed at jagged rocks, until finally, blessedly, a sliver of light appeared ahead. Sunlight had never felt so sacred. He burst into the open air, lungs burning, and without hesitation, he seized the nearest boulder, a massive, moss-covered thing, and heaved it into the mouth of Yomi. The impact shook the earth, sealing the underworld's entrance with a finality that echoed like thunder. But the victory was hollow. From behind the stone, Izanami's voice rose, no longer pleading but venomous. "You betray our bond," she spat. "Then know this, every day I will claim 1,000 lives from your world." Izanagi, still trembling, countered. "And I will build 1,500 birthing huts. Life will always outpace you." It was a defiance, yes, but also an admission. Death had entered the world, not as an accident, but as a curse born from broken love. This moment changed everything. Before, mortality had been an abstract shadow. Now it had teeth. The boulder wasn't just a barrier, it was a monument to separation, a physical embodiment of the line between the living and the dead. And as Izanagi collapsed onto the grass, the weight of his actions settled over him. He hadn't just lost Izanami, he'd unleashed her as death's sovereign, her wrath woven into the fabric of existence. From that day forward, every sunset, every wilted flower, every last breath would carry the echo of their fractured union. The world was alive, yes, but now, irrevocably, it was also doomed to die. The stench of Yomi clung to Izanagi's skin like a second layer of flesh, the underworld's corruption seeping into his very essence. Staggering to the riverbank, he collapsed into the shallows, his hands shaking as he scooped water over his face again and again, as if he could scrub away not just the filth, but the memory of what he'd seen. But this was no ordinary bath, it was a rebirth, a ritual as ancient as the gods themselves. Every drop that touched him hissed like oil on hot stone, the river frothing where his impurities dissolved. First, he tore off his cloak, its fabric stiff with the grime of Yomi, and as it hit the water, the current twisted it into something new. From its folds rose Amaterasu, the sun goddess, her radiance so fierce it forced Izanagi to shield his eyes. She didn't just glow, she was light itself, her golden hair streaming like dawn breaking over the horizon. Where her feet touched the river, steam rose in swirling tendrils, and the shadows that had clung to Izanagi shrank back. Here was warmth after the abyss, order after chaos, a deity so vital her very existence would later weave into the imperial lineage of Japan. Next came Susanoo, born from Izanagi's furious scrubbing of his nose. The storm god erupted into being with a roar, his hair wild as thunderheads, his eyes crackling with untamed energy. Unlike Amaterasu's steady brilliance, Susanoo was tempest incarnate, a whirlwind of contradictions, capable of both nurturing rains and devastating typhoons. Salt spray lashed the air around him, and the river trembled at his presence. In him, Izanagi saw reflected his own grief and rage, the storm that had driven him into, and out of, the underworld. But the ritual wasn't finished. With each cleansing motion, more deities emerged. Tsukuyomi, the moon god, dripped from Izanagi's right eye, his silver pallor a cool counterpoint to his sister Amaterasu's fire. From his left ear rose the leech child Haruko, no longer deformed but transformed into Abissu, the jovial god of fishermen and luck, proof that even the cursed could find redemption. Even the sludge from Izanagi's sandals birthed minor kami, their forms flickering like reflections on water. This wasn't just purification, it was alchemy. The river took what was broken and made it sacred, turning anguish into divinity. And as Izanagi stepped onto the bank, water streaming from his body, he understood the lesson: creation and destruction were two sides of the same blade. The gods born from his suffering would shape Japan's soul, Amaterasu's light guiding emperors, Susanoo's storms testing mortals, Tsukuyomi's quiet glow haunting poets. The underworld had stolen Izanami, but the river gifted him a new legacy, written in sunlight and thunder. Amaterasu's arrival wasn't just another divine birth, it was the moment the universe realigned itself toward light. Picture her rising from the river's steam, her radiance so intense it carved shadows into the landscape, turning night into day with a single exhale. This wasn't mere brightness, it was the sun itself given consciousness, a goddess whose warmth would nurture crops, whose gaze would dictate the rhythm of seasons. But Amaterasu's power went beyond celestial mechanics. She became the heartbeat of Japan's spiritual identity, her legacy woven into the very fabric of the nation's soul. Consider the imperial family's sacred claim descended not from conquerors or politicians, but from the sun. The Yamato dynasty, Japan's oldest continuous hereditary monarchy, traced its lineage directly to Amaterasu, a bond so revered that for centuries, emperors were considered living kami, bridges between heaven and earth. The three sacred treasures, the mirror, sword, and jewel, weren't just symbols of office. They were gifts from Amaterasu herself, talismans of her divine mandate. The mirror, forged to lure her from a cave, represented truth. The sword, plucked from a dragon's tail, embodied valor. The jewel, radiant as dawn, signified compassion. Together, they encapsulated the ideals of a ruler: to reflect, to protect, to nourish. Her influence extended far beyond politics. Every Shinto shrine's torii gate, painted vermilion to catch the sun's first light, was a silent homage to her. Farmers bowed to the east at sunrise, not out of habit, but in recognition of her life-giving power. Even the word for Japan, Nihon, carries her imprint, literally, the sun's origin. This wasn't mythology as mere story. It was a living dialogue between the land and its people, a reminder that divinity wasn't distant, but danced in every sunbeam that touched rice paddies or temple eaves. Yet Amaterasu's tale holds a paradox. The same goddess who gifted light also once hid it away, retreating into a cave after her brother Susanoo's rampages plunged the world into darkness. It took the laughter of other gods, the allure of a mirrored reflection, and the raw energy of a ritual dance to coax her back. This duality, her fragility and her might, makes her relatable. Even the sun has moments of vulnerability, but her return, that glorious burst of light as she emerged, taught a lesson etched into Japan's cultural memory. After every darkness, dawn will always, inevitably, break. To stand in the inner shrine at Eyes, rebuilt every 20 years with pristine cypress, is to feel Amaterasu's presence as a living force. The rituals performed there, unchanged for millennia, aren't nostalgia. They're a conversation across time. When the emperor still conducts rites clad in ancient robes, when pilgrims clap twice before bowed prayers, they're not honoring a myth. They're acknowledging the sunlight on their skin as the touch of a goddess who shaped a civilization. Amaterasu isn't just a deity of the past. She's the golden thread stitching Japan's spiritual identity together, from the first sunrise to the next. Susanoo burst into existence not with a whisper, but a howl, a tempest given flesh, his very breath stirring the river into frothing frenzy where Amaterasu had brought calm. Where his sister embodied the sun's unwavering constancy, Susanoo was the unpredictable gale that toppled trees and nourished crops in equal measure. His hair streamed like storm clouds, his laughter cracked like thunder, and his moods shifted faster than the winds he commanded. This wasn't just chaos, it was the raw, untamed force of nature itself, beautiful and terrifying in its refusal to be tamed. From the beginning, Susanoo's duality defined him. He could summon life, giving rains to end droughts, yet his tantrums sent typhoons scouring the coastlines. He gifted mortals with the first sake brewed from rice, teaching celebration, but in his grief over Izanagi's rejection, he tore through the heavens like a wounded beast, appending celestial order. The gods tolerated his outbursts until the day his rage turned toward Amaterasu's sacred rice fields. In a fit of reckless fury, he hurled a flayed horse into her weaving hall, its carcass splintering looms and staining the sunlight with blood. The violence wasn't just destructive, it was sacrilege, a violation of the harmony Amaterasu's light represented. The aftermath revealed the true cost of Susanoo's nature. Amaterasu, horrified, retreated into the Ama no Iwato cave, plunging the world into darkness. Crops withered, spirits faltered, and the gods trembled at the unraveling of cosmic balance. Susanoo's exile wasn't merely punishment, it was necessity. Cast down from the heavens, he wandered the earth, his storms now untethered from divine will. Yet even in banishment, his story twisted toward redemption. In Izumo, he slew the eight-headed serpent Yamata no Arachi, freeing a terrified village and discovering the legendary sword Kusanagi in the beast's tail, weapon he'd later offer as penance. Here lies the paradox of Susanoo. The same instability that shattered order also forged heroes. Without his wildness, Japan's myths would lack their fiercest trials and their brightest triumphs. His legacy whispers a truth as old as the storms he rode. Chaos isn't the enemy of creation. Sometimes it's the crucible. The underworld reshaped Izanami more thoroughly than any forge could alter metal. No longer the radiant goddess who coaxed islands from the sea or cradled newborn kami, she became Yomi's sovereign, a figure of terrifying majesty, her every breath laced with decay's inevitability. Where once her hands sculpted life, now they held dominion over spirits who'd never again see sunlight. This wasn't simply a change of realm, it was an inversion of her very essence. The same divine energy that once nurtured roots and rivers now sustained the endless twilight of the dead. Her presence, a constant reminder that all paths eventually led back to her shadowed throne. Consider the cruel irony. The goddess who birthed nations now presided over their dissolution. In Shinto tradition, death wasn't an enemy but a natural counterpart to existence, a polluted, yes, but inseparable from the cycle. Yet Izanami's transformation twisted this balance. Her promise to claim 1,000 lives daily wasn't mere vengeance. It was the universe's brutal counterweight to creation's exuberance. Farmers might pray to Amaterasu for harvests, but Izanami's influence lurked in every wilted stalk, every extinguished hearth. The warmth of the sun goddess and the chill of the underworld queen became two poles of the same cosmic axis. Her new form embodied this duality. Ancient texts describe her as both grotesque and awe-inspiring, a figure whose rotting visage could make warriors falter, yet whose remaining eye still gleamed with the intelligence of a creator. The maggots writhing in her flesh didn't diminish her authority, they reinforced it. This was divinity stripped of pretense, a raw manifestation of mortality's power. Even her voice carried contradiction whispers that could soothe a dying child one moment, then muster the thunder gods to hunt escapees the next. Modern rituals still echo this tension. During Japan's Aben festival, lanterns guide ancestral spirits back to the living world, a fleeting reunion overseen by Izanami's grudging permission. But the ceremony's end, when the lanterns are cast into rivers, carries an unspoken plea: may the dead return peacefully to her realm and not linger as vengeful ghosts. Izanami's legacy, then, isn't just about death's inevitability, but the delicate truce between remembrance and release. Her story warns that even love, when stretched beyond natural limits, can curdle into something as merciless as the grave. Yet in some rural shrines, you'll find hints of another interpretation: small offerings tucked beside weathered statues, not the usual coins or rice, but carved wooden cradles or tiny clay bowls. Here, worshippers remember Izanami's first role, not as death's queen, but as life's mother. These quiet devotions suggest a folk wisdom the myths never state outright, that perhaps, in Yomi's deepest chambers, the goddess still hums lullabies to the souls she once birthed under sunlight. Even Izanagi's discarded belongings pulsed with divine potential. Nothing was wasted in this sacred alchemy. As he shed his robe, the fabric pooled like liquid moonlight before rising into new forms. The god of garments, whose threads wove protection into every kimono's fold, and the goddess of looms, whose rhythm echoed in the click-clack of weavers' shuttles for generations. His sash tumbled away, birthing deities of knots and bindings, spirits who whispered secrets to sailors, tying storm-resistant hitches and brides, securing ceremonial abyss. Every stitch, every frayed edge carried traces of celestial intention. His sandals, still damp with Yomi's muck, split apart as they touched the earth. From their straw fibers emerged the god of travelers, his face wind, worn but kind, blessing crossroads and mountain passes where weary feet sought rest. The wooden soles cracked open, releasing minor kami who governed cobblestone paths and the soft moss that cushioned misplaced steps. Even the mud clinging to them wasn't mere filth, it hardened into the god of pottery, his hands eternally shaping clay at riverbanks where mortal artisans would later knead earth into vessels. Then came his sword, its blade dulled from severing ties with Izanami. When he cast it aside, the metal didn't clatter, it sang. The sound fractured into a dozen harmonies, each note solidifying into deities of blacksmiths' forges, of sword hilts wrapped in silk cord, of the quiet resolve in a warrior's final breath. The scabbard, rotting at the edges, birthed spirits who guarded sheathed weapons, and the sanctity of restraint, a counterpoint to the blade's inherent violence. This proliferation wasn't random. It revealed a fundamental truth. Divinity wasn't confined to grand acts. A dropped sandal, a forgotten cloak, each was a seed. Modern rituals still honor this belief. At festivals, worshippers toss worn-out needles into temple boxes with prayers, acknowledging the kami within broken tools. Farmers leave rusted plows at shrines, not as trash, but as offerings to the spirits who labored alongside them. Izanagi's unintentional creations teach that sacredness lingers in life's cast-offs, waiting to be acknowledged. The world hums with unseen deities not just in storms or sunbeams, but in the whisper of a discarded fan's last breeze. Exiled from the heavens and adrift in the mortal world, Susanoo's footsteps left storms in their wake, until he stumbled upon a weeping family in Izumo. Their grief wasn't over crops or shelter, but something far more horrifying. Every year, the eight-headed serpent Yamata no Arachi emerged from the mountains, demanding a sacrifice. 7 of their daughters had already vanished into its gaping maws, and now the youngest stood trembling, her fate sealed. Susanoo, ever unpredictable, didn't offer sympathy. He saw an opportunity. "Give me the girl," he demanded, his voice rough with purpose, "and I'll rid you of this beast." What followed wasn't just a battle, it was a masterclass in divine cunning. Susanoo ordered 8 massive vats of sake brewed not to drown his sorrows, but to drown the serpent's wits. As the creature slithered into the clearing, each head plunged greedily into a vat, gulping until the alcohol dulled its senses. The moment its many eyelids drooped, Susanoo struck. His sword flashed like lightning, severing head after head, the earth shaking as the beast thrashed in its death throes. But the final blow revealed something even the gods couldn't have foreseen. Lodged in Aracha's tail, a sword gleamed with unnatural light. Kusanagi, the grass cutter, its edge so sharp it could slice through wind itself. This wasn't just a trophy, it was a turning point. Susanoo, the tempestuous outcast, had unknowingly forged a relic that would one day rest in the hands of emperors. Kusanagi became one of Japan's 3 sacred treasures, a symbol of valor passed down through centuries. Yet the sword's origin, born from chaos and spilled serpent blood, hints at its dual nature. Like Susanoo himself, it carried both destruction and deliverance. The blade that decapitated a monster would later be revered as a divine protector. Its steel whispered to calm storms when enshrined properly. Susanoo's gift of Kusanagi to Amaterasu wasn't mere reconciliation. It was an unspoken apology wrapped in steel. The storm god had channeled his fury into something worthy of the sun goddess's radiance. And in that moment, the brother whose rage once darkened the world became the unintended architect of its most sacred safeguards. The serpent's blood may have stained the grass, but from that violence grew legends, rituals, and a sword that still cuts through myth into living history. The world had never known such darkness. When Amaterasu retreated into the Ama no Iwato cave, it wasn't just the sun vanishing. It was the heartbeat of creation stuttering to a halt. Crops withered without her warmth, rivers turned sluggish as if mourning, and even the gods stumbled blindly, their celestial power dimmed by her absence. This wasn't a tantrum, it was a divine strike, a protest against the chaos Susanoo had unleashed upon her sacred halls. The cave's entrance yawned like a wound, its shadows swallowing every attempt to coax her out. No pleas, no promises could reach her. The universe held its breath. Then the gods devised a plan as audacious as it was ingenious. If Amaterasu wouldn't respond to reason, they'd appeal to something deeper: curiosity. They gathered outside the cave, not with solemn prayers, but with raucous laughter. The goddess Yuzume, embodiment of mirth, climbed onto an overturned tub, her feet stamping rhythm as she shed her robes in a dance so wild, so unapologetically joyful. The other deities roared with laughter. The sound shook the earth, rattling the cave's stones. Meanwhile, hidden craftsmen unveiled their masterpiece, Yata no Kagami, a mirror of such polished brilliance it captured light that no longer existed. They hung it from a nearby tree, its surface angled toward the cave's entrance like a silent invitation. Amaterasu, shrouded in isolation, couldn't ignore the cacophony. The god's laughter was too alien, too discordant with the despair she'd expected. A sliver of doubt crept in. What could possibly inspire such revelry in her absence? Peering cautiously from the cave's edge, she glimpsed her own reflection in the mirror, magnified and radiant. For a heartbeat, she didn't recognize herself. The figure before her seemed a stranger, a goddess of such blinding glory, she gasped. In that moment of confusion, the gods seized their chance. A strong hand, some say it was Tajikarau, the god of strength, yanked her fully into the open, while another deity stretched a sacred rope behind her, barring retreat. Light erupted across the world like a dam breaking. The mirror's deception had worked. By showing Amaterasu her own power reflected back, they'd reminded her of what the world had lost. The crops straightened toward the sky, the rivers quickened, and even Susanoo, watching from exile, bowed his head. But the myth's brilliance lies in its layers. This wasn't just about restoring sunlight, it was about the necessity of reflection, both literal and metaphorical. The mirror became one of the three sacred treasures not because it was beautiful, but because it revealed truths even gods could overlook. And Yuzum's dance. It taught that joy could be as persuasive as force, that laughter might succeed where solemnity failed. To this day, the Ama no Iwato story reverberates in Japanese festivals. Kagura dances, performed at shrines, reenact Yuzum's revelry, their spinning steps a tribute to the divine mischief that saved the world. The mirror, enshrined at eyes, remains unseen by all but the highest priests, a symbol that some truths are too potent for casual viewing. And every dawn, when the sun crests the horizon, it's not just a celestial event, it's Amaterasu hesitating anew, choosing once more to step beyond the cave's threshold and grace the world with her presence. The Yata no Kagami isn't just a polished disc of metal, it's a portal to the soul's unvarnished truth. When the gods hung this sacred mirror outside Amaterasu's cave, they weren't merely tricking her with her own reflection. They were revealing the mirror's profound power to expose what even deities couldn't see unaided. In Shinto belief, mirrors don't lie. They strip away illusions, forcing confrontation with reality in its purest form. That's why this artifact, one of Japan's three sacred treasures, resides at the Heart of Eye's grand shrine, veiled from public view, a silent testament that some truths are too potent for casual gaze. Walk into any Shinto shrine today, and you'll find mirrors everywhere, though none as exalted as the Yata no Kagami. These aren't decorative accents, they're spiritual tools. Positioned behind altars or encased in ornate frames, they serve as physical embodiments of the kami's presence. Unlike Western traditions where mirrors might symbolize vanity or illusion, Shinto embraces them as conduits of clarity. When worshippers bow before these mirrors during rituals, they aren't praying to their own reflections, they're acknowledging the divine light within themselves, the fragment of Amaterasu's radiance that exists in all living things. The craftsmanship of these mirrors carries its own symbolism. Traditional techniques involve polishing bronze or precious metals until their surfaces become flawless, a process requiring patience and reverence. Artisans often speak of the mirror's heart, the spot where light gathers most intensely. This isn't poetic whimsy, it's a metaphor for the human condition. Just as imperfections in the metal distort reflections, so do selfish desires and anger warp one's perception of truth. Purification rituals before shrine mirrors, washing hands, rinsing mouths aren't about hygiene, but preparing the soul to face its own image without deception. Consider the mirror's role in myth beyond Amaterasu's cave. When the first emperor received the Yata no Kagami, it came with an admonition: look upon this as you would look upon us. The message was clear: truth isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary for righteous rule. Modern ceremonies still echo this ideal. During imperial enthronements, the mirror is presented in a shrouded box, its presence felt rather than seen, reminding leaders that governance requires confronting hard realities, not curated facades. Even the mirror's physical hiding speaks volumes. Unlike swords or jewels displayed during festivals, the Yata no Kagami remains perpetually wrapped in silk, glimpsed only by the highest priests during clandestine rites. This secrecy isn't about exclusion, but reverence for truth's sacred weight. Some realizations must be earned, not handed out freely. Pilgrims who visit shrines sense this potency. They stand before the empty inner sanctum, knowing the mirror's unseen presence demands introspection beyond superficial reflection. The mirror's duality is its genius. It can both reveal and conceal, humble and elevate. In a single glance, it shows mortals their flaws and their divine spark. That's the paradox at its core. Truth doesn't liberate or condemn. It simply exists, waiting patiently like polished bronze, for those brave enough to look without flinching. Izanagi's final act wasn't a grand farewell, but a quiet fading like mist retreating at dawn. After purifying himself in the river, after the birth of Amaterasu and Susanoo, after the horrors of Yomi still clinging to his memories like cobwebs, he simply stepped sideways from the world he'd helped create. Not into death gods don't die, but into Toko-Yo, the unseen realm, a place outside time where the oldest kami drift like half-remembered dreams. This wasn't surrender. It was the ultimate acknowledgement that creation needed room to breathe beyond its creator's shadow. Picture him standing at the threshold between realms, his sandals scuffing the edge of a cliff where the ocean below doesn't ripple but hangs suspended, as if even the waves respect this moment. The air here smells different, not of salt or pine, but of the silence between heartbeats. With one last glance at the lands below, Amaterasu's sunlight dappling the rice fields, Susanoo's storms brewing on the horizon, he crosses over. The transition isn't dramatic. No thunder, no parting of clouds, just a sigh of wind, and suddenly, he's neither here nor there, but somewhere in between. Toko-Yo isn't an underworld like Yomi's rotting halls, or a paradise like Takamagahara's golden plains. It's a liminal space where gods go when their stories are no longer needed in the foreground. Here, Izanagi becomes less a deity than a presence, a whisper in the roots of ancient trees, a tremor in the earth when volcanoes stir. Unlike Izanami, bound to her throne in death's kingdom, he chooses dissolution, his essence scattering like pollen on the wind. Yet even in retreat, his influence lingers. Fishermen off Awaji's coast still murmur prayers to him when nets come up empty, and in the quietest shrines, priests sometimes feel a draft with no source, a breath that might just be the first god passing through. The brilliance of this withdrawal lies in its humility. Izanagi doesn't demand worship or build monuments. By receding, he allows his children, and through them humanity, to claim the narrative. Amaterasu's descendants would rule Japan, Susanoo's adventures would inspire heroes, but Izanagi, he becomes the soil beneath it all, remembered not through grand temples, but through the simple act of existence itself. When a newborn takes its first breath or a seed splits open underground, that's where he resides now, not in the stories, but in the spaces between them. Even now, centuries after Izanagi and Izanami's footsteps faded from the earth, their presence lingers in every Shinto shrine's rustling curtains and echoing purification bells. Walk into any sacred space in Japan today, and you're stepping into the aftermath of their myth, where rituals born from their story still shape daily life. Take misogi, the act of cleansing with water. When worshippers rinse their hands and mouths at a shrine's Temazuya fountain, they're reenacting Izanagi's desperate river purification after Yomi, washing away spiritual grime just as he shed death's taint. The parallel isn't coincidence, it's living tradition. Priests still perform grand ohari ceremonies with branches of sakaki leaves, mimicking how Izanagi shook droplets from his spear to create islands, except now. Those droplets are paper streamers, fluttering with inscribed prayers as they carry impurities away. Ancestor veneration, too, pulses with echoes of the underworld. During Aben, when families light lanterns to guide spirits home, there's an unspoken tension in the air, a collective memory of Izanagi's failed retrieval. The festival's climax, where lanterns are floated down rivers, isn't just symbolism. It's a gentle compromise with Izanami's domain. Visit, but don't stay. The flickering lights seem to whisper. Even the foods offered, cucumbers carved into spirit horses for quick arrivals, eggplants into oxen for slow departures, reflect that delicate negotiation between worlds. Then there are the kamidana, household altars where families honor kami. These miniature shrines often hold mirrors, not just as symbols of Amaterasu's radiance, but as silent reminders of Izanagi's truth. Reflection precedes reverence. In Shinto, you don't pray to the gods as distant entities. You acknowledge the divine within the everyday, the way Izanagi found sacredness in a discarded sash or a muddy sandal. A farmer bowing to his rice field isn't performing empty ritual. He's continuing the Creator's work, tending a world where every rock and stream might harbor kami. This thread runs deepest in Jinya architecture. The Torii gates' vermilion arches, they mirror the floating bridge of heaven, marking the boundary between mundane and divine. The Shime-nawa ropes, thick with twisted straw, evoke the one that barred Amaterasu's cave, and by extension, the cord Izanagi used to sever ties with Yomi. Even the shrine's inner sanctum, often empty, speaks to Shinto's core truth. The gods are everywhere and nowhere, as tangible as Izanami's first islands, as elusive as Izanagi's final breath. Modern Japan may be a land of bullet trains and neon, but beneath the pavement, the old myths still hum. When a sumo wrestler stomps to scare off demons, that's Susanoo's defiance. When a bride wears white for purity, that's Izanagi's desperate river cleanse. And when a tsunami warning sounds, there's no blasphemy in fearing the sea, just hard-won respect for the chaos that birthed the world. The Creator's legacy isn't locked in scrolls. It's in the way a salaryman pauses under a torii, touches his chest, and remembers, however briefly, that he walks on land stirred into being by a jeweled spear. The tale of Izanagi and Izanami resonates with echoes of other ancient myths, but listen closely, and the differences sing louder than the similarities. Take Orpheus and Eurydice, Greece's tragic duo. Like Izanagi, Orpheus descends into the underworld to reclaim his beloved, armed with nothing but love and desperation. But where Izanagi's failure stems from broken taboos and the irreversible taint of death, Orpheus's undoing is pure human frailty, a single glance back, driven by doubt rather than defiance. The Greek story frames love as a test of faith, while the Japanese myth treats it as a negotiation with cosmic order. Izanagi isn't punished for hesitation. He's condemned for witnessing a truth no living being should see. Then there's Tiamat, the primordial chaos dragon of Mesopotamia. Like Izanami, she's a creator-turned-destroyer, her body carved into the fabric of the world. But Tiamat's slaughter by Marduk is a political coup, younger god usurping the old guard to impose order through violence. Izanami's transformation, though, isn't about power struggles. Her descent into Yomi twists creation's nurturing energy into something darker, yet still essential. Death isn't an enemy to be conquered here, it's a counterpart to life, its queen both reviled and revered. The contrasts reveal something profound. Western myths often paint death as a foe to outwit or overthrow heroes stealing fire, saints triumphing over hell. But Izanagi's flight from Yomi doesn't end with victory. His sealing of the underworld acknowledges an unbridgeable divide. The Japanese tradition embraces death as inevitability rather than failure, its goddess ruling a realm just as vital as Amaterasu's sunlit heavens. Even the creation methods diverge sharply, where the Bible's God commands light into being with words, and Maori legends speak of gods tearing apart lovers to form sky and earth. Izanagi and Izanami rely on ritual and tool, a spear, a circling pillar, precise chants. Their story isn't about omnipotence, but collaboration with each other, with materials, with rules that even gods must follow. The closest parallel might be the Navajo's emergence tales, where beings climb through worlds via trial and error. But no other myth so tightly binds creation's beauty to its brutal cost, where every island birthed is shadowed by a goddess's curse, and every sunrise carries the weight of a cave's reopened door. These differences aren't just cultural footnotes, they're windows into how civilizations grappled with existence's biggest questions. The Greeks feared death's finality, the Mesopotamians worshipped order's triumph, but Japan's creators teach that light and decay are two sides of the same spear, forever stirring the brine of existence. Beneath Japan's modern cities and rice fields lie silent testaments to beliefs that stretch back millennia, artifacts whispering of the time when Izanagi and Izanami first stirred the brine of creation. Among the most compelling are clay figurines from the Yayoi period, around 300 years before the Common Era, unearthed from sites like Yoshinagari in Kyushu. These aren't mere pottery. Their exaggerated hips and breasts echo the fertility motifs central to the creator's myth. Some scholars argue these figurines could represent early iterations of Izanami herself, the mother who birthed islands and gods, her divine fecundity distilled into baked earth. Then there are the bronze bells, known as dataku, found buried in ritual clusters across western Japan. Their surfaces ripple with intricate engravings, swirls that some interpret as primal waters, or figures that might depict the celestial spear's descent into chaos. The way these bells were deliberately broken before burial hints at sacrificial offerings, perhaps mirroring Izanagi's shattering of Kagetsuchi or his abandonment of Haruko. At the Toro archaeological site, a preserved wooden oar from the same era bears uncanny resemblance to descriptions of Aim no Nuboko, its length suggestive not of a tool for fishing, but for stirring something far grander. Most telling are the Iwakura sacred stones nestled in ancient groves, often near waterfalls or mountain passes. These weathered rocks, still revered in Shinto today, might be the earliest physical anchors of the creator's legacy. Unlike later shrine structures, Iwakura require no buildings. Their power lies in their raw, unshaped presence, much like the islands Izanagi and Izanami pulled dripping from the sea. At Osaka's Omiwa Shrine, which lacks a main hall altogether, the deity is believed to inhabit the entire Mount Miwa, a concept that mirrors how the creator's essence permeates the natural world rather than being confined to idols. Recent discoveries add tantalizing layers. In 2021, researchers examining a 5th-century Haniwa clay cylinder from Saitama noticed markings previously dismissed as weathering now recognized as a possible early script referencing the gods who shaped the land. Meanwhile, isotopic analysis of Yayoi-era ritual swords reveals ore sourced from the very regions where myths place Izanagi's purification. Awaji Island's copper deposits bear traces of ceremonial smelting. This isn't coincidence, it's cultural memory forged in metal and earth. Yet the most profound evidence might be invisible. Laser scans of the Nara Basin show subterranean patterns aligning with old processional routes, paths that still follow the contours of the 8 islands described in the Kojiki. Modern pilgrims walking these trails unknowingly retrace steps first taken by those who worshipped the creators not as distant legends, but as living forces in every stone and stream. The artifacts don't just depict the myth, they are remnants of a time when the boundary between story and soil didn't yet exist. The threads of Izanagi and Izanami's story are woven so deeply into Japanese culture that even today, their echoes pulse through festivals, brushstrokes, and ancient texts. Take Ohari, the great purification ceremony held every June and December at shrines across Japan. When priests wave onasa sacred wands draped with paper streamers over crowds, they're reenacting Izanagi's desperate cleansing in the river after fleeing Yomi. The fluttering strips aren't just decorations, they're symbolic vessels for contamination, carrying away spiritual grime like the droplets that once fell from his spear. Participants leave lighter, as if they've shed their own underworld taint, proving the myth isn't just a tale, it's a living ritual, a collective exhale woven into the calendar. Turn to classical ukiyo-e prints, and you'll find the creator's legacy in unexpected places. In Kuniyoshi's The Ghost of Izanami, her skeletal hand emerges from swirling ink like a nightmare made visible, a stark contrast to the delicate cherry blossoms framing the scene. This juxtaposition, beauty and decay, mirrors the Shinto belief that life and death share the same breath. Even Hokusai's great wave carries whispers of the myth. The frothing claws of water might be Susanoo's rage, while the distant Mount Fuji stands immutable as Amaterasu's light. These artists didn't just illustrate legends, they channeled the primal energies Izanagi and Izanami first set loose upon the world. Then there's literature's sacred bedrock, the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. These 8th century texts aren't dry histories, they're lyrical tapestries where the creator's saga anchors Japan's divine right to exist. The Kojiki's account of Izanagi's spear stirring reeds like poetry. The brine dripped down, coiling into islands like curds forming in milk. Such imagery wasn't mere flourish, it was political theology, framing the imperial line as descendants of Amaterasu herself. Modern readers might skim these passages as folklore, but for centuries, they were as vital as lawbooks, their verses recited to justify everything from harvest rites to samurai rebellions. The myth's cultural fingerprints extend further. In Kagyura theater, dancers twirl with jeweled spears, their movements echoing the primordial stirring of the seas. At Izumo Taisha, priests still tie knots in sacred ropes to symbolize Izanagi's separation from Yomi, each twist a defiance of death's grip. Even children's folktales about sun goddesses hiding in caves or storm gods slaying serpents are simplified echoes of the epic. What makes this myth endure isn't just its age, it's its adaptability. Like the brine clinging to Izanagi's spear, the story reshapes itself across mediums, proving that creation myths aren't relics. They're mirrors, reflecting each generation's hopes, fears, and unshakable bond with the land itself. The myths of Izanagi and Izanami refuse to stay trapped in ancient scrolls. They've erupted into modern pop culture with the same primal energy that once birthed islands. Take Noragami, the hit anime where gods walk Tokyo's neon streets. Here, Izanami isn't just an underworld queen. She's a haunting, melancholic figure trapped in her own decaying realm, her lullabies twisting into curses. The series reimagines her relationship with Yato, a stray god, mirroring Izanagi's abandonment, but with a poignant twist. What if the forgotten goddess could demand answers from her descendants? It's a brilliant update, swapping celestial spears for subway battles while keeping the myth's emotional core intact. Video games have taken even bolder liberties. In Okami, the sun goddess Amaterasu isn't just a distant deity, she's a playable wolf. Her celestial brushstrokes restoring life to a cursed land, the game's climax. A showdown with Arachi, the eight-headed serpent Susanoo once slaughtered, now resurrected with pixelated fury. What makes this adaptation genius is its interactivity. Players don't just hear about Izanagi's purification ritual, they physically guide Amaterasu through rivers, washing away corruption with each splash of ink-inspired water. Suddenly, myth isn't something you read, it's something you do. Films, too, have woven the creator's saga into new textures. On Myoji, the yin-yang master reimagines Izanami's curse as a pandemic of restless spirits, her wrath literally haunting medieval Kyoto. The special effects transform her decay into swirling ash and embers, a far cry from traditional No Theater's subtle masks, but just as chilling. Even Hollywood dipped its toes in Kubo and the Two Strings, where the Moon King's tyranny echoes Izanagi's fatal glance, both stories about parents whose love curdles into something monstrous. What unites these retellings isn't just borrowed names or aesthetics, it's how they preserve the myth's essence, the tension between creation and destruction, the cost of defying natural order while letting it evolve. A teenager watching Noragami might not realize they're absorbing a 3,000-year-old warning about the underworld's pull. A gamer battling Arachi in Okami unknowingly reenacts Susanoo's redemption arc. That's the power of these stories. They slip past our modern skepticism, reminding us that gods and monsters aren't relics. They're mirrors, reflecting our own world's chaos and beauty back at us, sometimes through a controller, sometimes on a theater screen, but always with the same primal resonance. Izanagi and Izanami's legacy is a paradox carved into the soul of Japan. Reminder that creation and destruction aren't opposing forces, but two currents in the same river. They stood together on the floating bridge of heaven, stirring the cosmos into being, yet their story is just as much about what unravels as what is woven. Every island birthed from their union carried the shadow of Izanami's curse. Every sunrise gifted by Amaterasu held the memory of her retreat into darkness. This duality isn't tragedy, it's the heartbeat of existence. The world needs both the spear that shapes land and the fire that reduces it to ash, both the lullaby and the funeral dirge. Their influence stretches far beyond ancient texts. In modern Shinto, every ritual mirrors their acts, the purification rites echoing Izanagi's desperate river cleanse, the sacred ropes recalling his barrier against Yomi. When a farmer prays for rain or a surgeon washes their hands before a life-saving operation, they're unknowingly honoring the creator's balance between nurture and loss. Even Japan's resilience in the face of earthquakes and tsunamis carries a whisper of this myth, a hard-won respect for nature's destructive power, paired with an unshakable will to rebuild. What makes their story timeless isn't just its cosmic scale, but its humanity. Izanagi's grief, Izanami's wrath. These aren't divine abstractions. They're emotions we've all felt, magnified to mythological proportions. When we chase lost love past reason or rage against life's unfairness, we're walking paths they carved millennia ago. That's the power of mythology. It doesn't just explain the world, it helps us navigate our place within it. So what do you think? Do these ancient tales still hold wisdom for our modern lives, or are they relics of a bygone era? Share your thoughts below, whether it's about Japanese mythology, creation stories from your own culture, or the way these old gods still flicker in today's art and anime. After all, every comment is its own kind of creation myth, adding new threads to an ever-expanding tapestry. And who knows, maybe somewhere, Izanagi is still listening, his spear poised to stir the next great story into being.